The hallway felt colder than it should have, the kind of cold that crawls under the skin and makes every step feel heavier than the last. I held the small package tighter, wondering for the 10th time why I had agreed to bring it here when I could have easily said no. Maybe it was the way my husband had barely looked up from his phone when he asked me to drop it off. Maybe it was the way he muttered, "Just do it for me," without noticing how tired I was, how I'd been waiting all day for even a few minutes of real attention. Lately, I felt more like a passing shadow in my own home, present but unnoticed. The closer I got to the door, the more my heart thudded in my chest. It made no sense. I knew the men staying here. They were my husband's friends, familiar faces I had seen at dinners, gatherings, events. Yet tonight something felt different. My hand hovered over the door for a moment. I listened. A faint murmur of voices drifted through the wood, low and steady, like they were deep in conversation or waiting for something, or someone that I knocked. The voices fell silent almost instantly, as if my presence had pressed pause on their world. The door opened just enough for warm light to spill into the hallway, and then one of them stepped forward. He didn't say anything at first. He just looked at me with a kind of attention I wasn't used to anymore. Genuine, focused, surprised, but in a way that made my pulse race for reasons I didn't want to explore. Before I could hand him the package, the other two appeared behind him. All three stood there, watching me like they had known I was the one who would show up. It should have felt uncomfortable, but instead it sent a strange wave through me. Awareness, curiosity, and something sharper that I tried to push away. "You came," one of them said softly, as though he didn't expect me to follow through. His tone wasn't flirtatious. It was something else, something more observant. As if he could see the exhaustion I tried so hard to hide that I forced a small smile and raised the package. "He asked me to bring this." They exchanged a glance I couldn't interpret, then stepped back, leaving space for me to enter. I should have handed it over and left immediately. That was the logical thing to do. But the warmth spilling from inside contrasted so sharply with the cold loneliness. I felt every day that my feet paused. I didn't step inside, but I didn't step back either. Point one of them noticed. "You all right?" he asked, not casually, not in passing. He asked like he actually wanted to know. No one had asked me that in weeks. That I swallowed, suddenly aware of how fast my heart was beating. I didn't understand why all three of them were watching me with such focus, or why being seen so clearly made my breath catch a little. But I knew one thing. The moment I knocked on that door, something shifted in the air. Something I couldn't name yet, but something I could feel settling around me like a quiet storm waiting to break. I stepped inside before I even realized I had moved, as if my body had made the choice on its own. The door closed behind me with a soft click, and for a moment the sound lingered in the air, heavier than it should have been. The room wasn't extraordinary, just warm lighting, a table with a few scattered papers, the faint scent of coffee. But the way they looked at me shifted everything. It wasn't the look of men seeing someone unexpected. It was the look of people who suddenly noticed what they had overlooked before. I placed the package on the table, trying to steady my hands. "I should go," I said, though my voice lacked conviction. One of them raised an eyebrow slightly, not mocking, just curious, as if he heard the hesitation I was trying to hide. Another leaned on the edge of the couch, studying me with quiet interest, the kind of attention that made me feel strangely visible. "You seem tense," one of them said. "Long day." It was such a simple question, but the sincerity in it made my chest tighten. I wasn't used to anyone noticing small shifts in me. My husband rarely did. He was always too busy, calls, files, deadlines. Everything mattered to him more than the person standing right in front of him. "Something like that," I replied, trying to mask the fatigue in my voice. They didn't nod dismissively or move on. They waited. They listened. They actually wanted the answer, and that surprised me more than anything else tonight. Another one spoke gently. "You look like you haven't slept well." The comment wasn't flirtatious. It was observant. Sharp. Accurate. Too accurate. I felt a flicker of embarrassment at being read so easily, but also a strange relief. Like someone had finally acknowledged a truth I'd been carrying alone. I tried to laugh it off. "It's nothing. Just normal life stuff." But they didn't buy it, and the silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was understanding. Like they recognized something in me I hadn't even admitted to myself. Point one of them gestured toward a chair. "Sit for a minute. If you want." I should have said no. I should have walked out, gone back to the safe, predictable life I knew. But I didn't. I sat. And when I did, it felt like releasing a breath I'd been holding for months. The conversation shifted to lighter topics at first: work, routines, things happening around the neighborhood. But even in casual talk, there was a kind of focus in the way they spoke to me. When I answered, they listened. When I laughed softly, they noticed. Every small thing I said landed somewhere, not ignored the way it usually was. One of them complimented something small: my choice of bag, the way I matched it with my jacket. It wasn't inappropriate, but it was thoughtful, specific, the kind of remark my husband never bothered with anymore. That single detail sank deeper than it should have. The air around us felt warm, charged in a way I didn't know how to interpret. I knew staying too long was a mistake, yet the longer I sat there, the harder it became to convince myself to leave. Their attention wrapped around me like a soft, steady current, reminding me of a version of myself I had lost. Someone worth noticing. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I ignored it. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't invisible. I wasn't secondary. I wasn't an afterthought. And that dangerous feeling of being seen, wanted, acknowledged began to blur every line I thought I wouldn't cross. I told myself again that I needed to leave, but the thought felt distant, like something I was supposed to believe rather than something I genuinely intended to do. The room had settled into a quiet warmth, the kind that makes time feel slower, heavier, more deliberate. Their voices softened, their posture relaxed, but their attention never drifted away from me. And that, more than anything, was what made it so hard to stand up and walk out. One of them shifted closer. Not too close, just enough to show he was listening. "You don't usually look this worn out," he said. "Something's going on, isn't it?" The words cracked something open inside me. I wasn't used to anyone noticing my silence, let alone reading the heaviness behind it. I tried to brush it off, but another one leaned forward, elbows on his knees, gaze steady and patient. "You don't have to pretend," he said. "Not here." That simple assurance hit deeper than I expected. I felt the pressure of the past few months pressing up against my throat. Arguments cut short, conversations avoided, the feeling of being tolerated instead of valued. I didn't plan to open up, but the exhaustion made it impossible to hold everything together. "It's just been a lot," I finally whispered. "Everything at home feels like walking through a fog. I talk, but I'm unheard. I try, but it goes unnoticed. It's like nothing about me matters anymore." The moment the words slipped out, I felt exposed, vulnerable, almost foolish for revealing so much. But instead of awkward glances or forced sympathy, there was quiet understanding. One of them nodded slowly. "You deserve better than being invisible," he said gently. "Everyone deserves to be seen." I hadn't realized how badly I needed to hear that until the words reached me. My eyes stung unexpectedly, and I looked away, embarrassed by the sudden emotion welling up. But they didn't comment on it. They didn't stare. They just sat with me, absorbing everything without judgment. Another spoke, voice lower, calmer. "When's the last time someone asked how you really feel?" I couldn't answer. The silence that followed was enough. It wasn't physical closeness that made everything shift. It was the emotional gravity of the moment. The feeling of being understood, maybe for the first time in a very long time. Their presence formed a quiet circle around me, not trapping me but holding me gently in place. My heartbeat grew louder in my ears, not from fear, but from the sudden realization that I had already crossed a line, long before stepping into this room. Infidelity wasn't always a physical act. Sometimes it started with a conversation, a moment of connection that felt too intimate, too honest, too familiar. One of them spoke again, softer than before. "You don't have to go back to feeling small." The words hung between us, heavy and dangerous, not because they asked for anything but because they acknowledged everything I had been trying to ignore. The room felt smaller, warmer, more charged. I could feel their eyes on me, not consuming but caring. And in that moment I made a choice I couldn't take back. Not with actions but with acceptance that I let myself stay. I let myself feel seen. And that was the moment everything changed. When I finally stepped back into the hallway, the air outside felt colder than I remembered, as if the world itself had shifted temperature while I was inside. The door clicked softly behind me, but the sound echoed like something heavier, something final. I wrapped my arms around myself and began walking, trying to steady the uneven rhythm of my breathing. Every step away from that apartment felt strangely weightless, As though I was floating rather than moving. My phone vibrated again. 3 messages from my husband, all short, all practical. None asking where I was. None asking how I felt. I stared at the screen for a moment, feeling a strange mix of guilt and numbness. After everything that had just happened inside that apartment, not physically but emotionally, I expected to feel panic, remorse, something sharper. Instead, all I felt was a quiet ache, a realization I'd been avoiding for far too long. I reached my car and sat for a while, hands resting on the steering wheel, staring at the faint reflection of my own silhouette in the window. I didn't look different, but something inside me had undeniably shifted. The conversations, the attention, the way they listened. None of it was planned, but every part of it revealed something I had tried to bury under routine and responsibility. I couldn't pretend anymore that everything at home was fine. I couldn't pretend I wasn't lonely. I couldn't pretend that I wasn't starving for the smallest kind of emotional presence. I closed my eyes, replaying the last words I heard before leaving. You don't have to go back to feeling small. They weren't instructions. They weren't an invitation. They were a mirror held up to the truth I had been refusing to see. When I finally drove home, the house was dark except for the faint glow of the television. My husband was right where he always was at this hour, half asleep on the couch, remote clutched loosely in his hand. He didn't look up when I entered. Didn't ask why I was late. Didn't notice the weight I carried in my expression or the silence I wrapped around myself like a coat. I stood there for a long moment, watching him, wondering when we had become 2 people simply sharing a roof instead of a life. The distance between us felt wider than the entire walk back from that apartment. I set my keys down quietly and went to the bedroom, sitting on the edge of the bed without turning on the lights. The darkness made everything feel sharper. I thought about the warmth in that apartment, the way those 3 voices blended into something steady and grounding. I thought about how it felt to be seen rather than dismissed. And for the first time in a long time, I questioned whether staying in a place where I had grown invisible was truly loyalty, or just fear. No decisions were made that night. No confessions, no sudden endings. Only a quiet understanding that things couldn't continue unchanged. Something had opened inside me, something I couldn't close again no matter how hard I tried. The knock on their door was supposed to be a small errand, nothing more. But it became the moment that forced me to confront the truth. I had been disappearing piece by piece, and that night was the first time I finally felt myself exist again.